All right, hey there, welcome to MS101, Lesson 08 on the Army Profession. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS with the University of Montana Grizzly Battalion, and I'm going to be leading you through this lesson today. Now, before we start, take a moment if you'd like, bring your phone out, go ahead and scan that QR code right there. That's going to lead you to a website version of this exact same presentation, but depending on when you're watching this, it might be more updated. So I'm currently recording this for the school year 24-25. So if you're watching this after the fall of 2024, there might be some updates. It might look a little different than the video that you're about to watch. Go ahead and scan that. There's also going to be some clickable links, embedded videos, other things that you can actually click on and get to outside resources. Another thing you might want to do, because this presentation and this lesson itself has a lot of information, you probably want to have a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil out so you can jot some notes down, or just take a Word doc, have it off to the side if you're watching this on a computer, and just type up as we go. So feel free to pause the video as we go through, take those notes. You never know what you might need for an upcoming exam, but overall, all of this is very important for you to remember and understand for the rest of your career. So as always, like with a lot of my lessons, you're going to see this slide right here, like I said, with some clickable links. That first one there, the Army Profession Read Ahead, that's going to be a longer document that goes a little bit more into depth about what we're talking about today. And that second link there, that lesson assessment, it's going to be basically a check on learning. You might already be assigned this from your cadre. They might have it on hand to give to you. But this is going to be a digital version of that assessment where you're going to go through and basically take everything that you learned from this lesson and apply it to a different scenario. So let's get right into it. It's going to be a lot of questions that I want you to think about as we go through, so feel free to pause the video and read these questions in blue, think about your own answers, and as we go through, I'll give you some of my input or some of the correct doctrinal answers as well. So our first question, since we're talking about the Army profession, so I want you to think about the difference between a profession and a professional. Now, hopefully you said something along the lines that a profession is the vocation, right? So it's the field. If you're an ROTC student or a college student watching this, you're currently likely training and learning and getting your academics all wrapped around a certain field that you eventually want to build a career in, right? So profession is that field or vocation, whereas the professional, pretty cut and dry, is the member of that vocation. So for example, one profession might be healthcare, big, broad profession, whereas the professional could be a nurse, or a doctor, or a specialist within that healthcare. So again, pretty common sense answer, but we're really trying to dive into the profession and the difference between the two. Right, so now we're gonna watch a fairly low quality clip here, but stick with me. This is from one of my favorite movies of all time, 300. And if you've seen it before, it's amazing. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. We're going to watch a short, just over a minute long clip here, where you're going to see the Spartan king Leonidas greeting the Greeks from another part of the island. Now those Greeks are there on the right. You're going to see King Leonidas there on the left. And while they're talking, King Leonidas is going to compare the quality of his soldiers to the other ones. And really it's going to be based on the idea that the military is their profession. So watch this clip, see what you can pull out of it, and then we'll talk about it on the backside.
Dark sauce. What a pleasant surprise. This morning's full of surprises, Leonidas. You've been tricked.
If you wonder, this is a surprise.
Silence. We heard Sparta was on the warpath. We were eager to join forces.
If it is blood you seek,
You're welcome to join us. Keeping on this handful of soldiers against us. And you, Acadian, what is your profession?
sculptor, sir.
You?
Blacksmith.
Spartans! What is your profession?
All right, so with that, what point is King Leonidas trying to make? What was the point of having his soldiers respond that way after asking the other Greeks what their professions were? Now, hopefully you're thinking his point was to say that his soldiers believed in that cause. They believed that the only thing that mattered was that they were professionals, they were soldiers, and their profession was being a soldier, right? So now why do you think the Spartans identify with being professional soldiers while the other Greeks identified more with their being a blacksmith, being a potter, being a sculptor? Now my input here, I would think that it's probably based on how King Leonidas leads his Spartans. He really kicks in this idea and really defines them as soldiers only. Everything else doesn't matter. What they did prior to putting on that uniform and gearing up to go defend their areas didn't matter. None of that mattered anymore. Their individual backgrounds were no longer, because at this moment in time, they identify only as being professional soldiers, and everything they do has to align with that profession. So that's my input. You might have some other thoughts on that, on why those Spartans felt differently than the other Greek soldiers, but just consider that and think about it as we go through the rest of this lesson. So moving on, what do I want you to know today? Well, by the end of this, I want you to be able to define the Army profession. Then I want you to also be able to list the 5 essential characteristics of the Army profession. And then by the end here, we're going to talk about the roles of Army professionals. I want you to be able to kind of get a broad understanding of those 3 roles. So let's think about this. What do you think are some essential characteristics of professions? What makes them different than just a job? You know, we have the professions and we have jobs. So what are some essential characteristics that you can think of or list off that define something as a profession? I'll give you some examples of professions here. We're thinking things like healthcare, legal type professions, maybe therapy type professions, academia professions. What characteristics define those? Now, according to us, you know, certificates, maybe some additional education. There's some fees to pay potentially for being part of that profession. So the big characteristics that we use here, and these are pretty broad, but we consider them to be full-time occupations. Their members possess training or education programs that are relative to their field. They have a distinct body of knowledge. They operate within established ethics, and they're self-policing. So there's ways and you know, left and right limits where they police within that autonomy of themselves within the profession. We'll talk more about what that means as we go through this. So when we talk about those professions, healthcare, legal, academia, how do those aspects above correlate to the Army as a profession? Well, especially if we're thinking about active duty, that's a full-time occupation, right? That you are a soldier full-time, that is your job, that is the field that you are working in. Of course, we in the Army, we have a lot of training and we have education programs for certain promotions, and to progress through your career, you have to go to specific schools. We have very job-specific schools that you would go to, like advanced individual training or BOLIC, basic officer leader course. We obviously have a very distinct body of knowledge. You're learning that through ROTC. We do operate within established ethics, or our Army values, and our Army ethic is what we call it. And we're self-policing. We actually have our own set of laws called the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. And so we have our own policing laws that our soldiers fall under as well. And then we also have different departments or agencies, different sections within the Army that also allow us to do things like, think of like the IG, that's a self-policing agency where you can make a complaint to IG, the Inspector General, and have things looked into. So that's how the Army is considered a profession. We do consider all of those things as part of what makes us an Army. So what do you think makes the Army profession unique from other professions? There are some things that we specifically have. We're unique because we have responsibilities related to the ethical application of violence, right? We're a violent organization, whether we want to believe that or not, or you want to take that into heart. We are a violent organization because we do that on a large scale on behalf of the nation. Our job is to defend the United States, right? And to assist our allies. Unfortunately, that means that comes with things like war and other unfortunate, violent things that we have to be a part of. But the biggest part of that is that we have responsibilities related to the ethical application of that violence. So we do have specific rules of engagement. We have specific laws that we have to follow that are outside of just our basic civilian laws. So, what element separates us as an Army from other professions? Well, everybody signs a contract, right? So when you enlist, you sign a contract. When you officially contract into ROTC, you put your name on that line. When you become an officer, you're commissioned, you sign another contract. We're also governed by an additional set of laws, like I said, that Uniform Code of Military Justice, and we can't just start at the top. So you can't join in as a private first class and then 2 days later come on over and become a colonel, a brigade commander. We have a very progressive way of moving up through the organization. So what is the Army profession? Well, first we need to know what a profession is. So the profession, per the actual definition, is a trusted, self-policing, and relatively autonomous vocation whose members develop and apply expert knowledge as human expertise to render an essential service to society in a particular field. And that's a whole lot of words to basically say it's its own profession that sticks to itself, the members have expert knowledge, and then they render some sort of service to society. The Army profession, you'll see, sounds a lot like that. We are a trusted vocation of soldiers and Army civilians, and our collective experience is the ethical design, generation, support, and application of land power, because remember, the Army is a land force. We serve under civilian authority, and we're entrusted to defend the Constitution and the rights and interests of the American people. So that's the definition of the Army profession itself. Make sure you either write that down, take a screenshot, take a picture of this, and start to memorize the overall concepts of what our Army profession really is. Now, the Army profession itself, you'll see as defined in that we are soldiers and Army civilians. So the profession is actually two separate communities of practice. On the left there, you'll see we have the profession of arms. And that includes all soldiers of the regular Army, Army National Guard, and the Army Reserve, those three components. We also have the Army Civilian Corps, where you'll hear maybe sometimes DA civilians, Department of the Army Civilians. And those are civilians that serve the Department of the Army and serve and help soldiers. So if you go onto a military base, you're going to see both. You'll see soldiers, right? You'll see us in uniform, and then you'll also see Army civilians. You might actually have Army civilians in your own program, maybe your HRA or your RU. Both of those typically could be considered Army civilians, and a lot of Army civilians have prior experience. So they're either already retired out of the military or they have some sort of time, and sometimes they could be serving in both. Like in the National Guard, you could also be doing DA Army civilian work and be considered like an M-Day soldier where you're drilling on weekends. So we have those two there. They're very important that they support each other, they serve each other, they work together, because we cannot succeed as an Army without our civilian corps. Very important. They even have two separate creeds. We have our Soldiers Creed, and then you have the Army Civilian Corps Creed there on the right. So it's important to understand that the Army is not just a bunch of soldiers. We also have support from our Army civilians. So now, how does the Army actually fulfill the requirements of a profession? Well, we certify people in their jobs, we have job-specific training, and we're self-policing. So that's how we can be considered a profession. Now, how important is it for our soldiers to view their job as a profession, or their occupation as a profession, versus just a job? And when I say just a job, I'm thinking entry level, not really career-based fields. So maybe in high school you had a job. Were you a lifeguard at the community pool? Did you babysit on the side? Did you work at a fast food restaurant? Did you do some construction stuff during the summer to gain a little bit of extra money? Those are jobs, right? Not many of us particularly are looking for long-term 30 years as a babysitter, unless you're in college to get some education like education in K-12 education or something, right? Not many of us are jumping into Taco Bell for that $14 an hour and hoping that that's where we're going to be for 30 years. So how important is it, going back, why do we want our soldiers to actually see their occupation as a profession in the Army versus just a job? Well, it's important because knowing that we're part of a profession actually instills our pride in a job well done. We take it more seriously. We want better for our organization. And as you saw in that clip from 300, it's important for our soldiers to view themselves as part of a profession, more than just an entry-level job that they could quit at any time. The profession itself is a service, right? Like it said, it's defined as providing a service to society. And that's very important, that you can see yourself and feel a sense of belonging. And we want our soldiers to feel that, which is exactly why this is one of those lessons that you learn right off the bat in ROTC. You get drilled into you if you go to basic training, and it's continually pushed on you, and you're reminded of it throughout your entire career in the Army. So now let's talk our 5 essential characteristics of the Army profession. So you'll see there we've got 5 different ones on the top, and their definitions or short statements about them are on the bottom. So we have our honorable service, which is considered our noble calling to service and sacrifice. So honorable is the big word there. Then we've got military expertise. Now that's our ethical application of our land power. That's being an expert in your field and an expert in what we do in the military. Now the center one, the bedrock of our profession, is trust. We consider trust to be one of the biggest characteristics of our profession. Trust in our soldiers, trust in our leaders, trust in ourselves, and we want the American people to trust us, right? Then you have the stewardship of the profession, which is defined as our long-term responsibility. And that's going to be more creating a legacy and making sure, the way I teach this typically is every time you enter a position or an assignment in the Army, your goal is to make that position better than it was when you got it, and set up your subordinates to be better than you were, be better leaders, and continue on the traditions and the legacy that we have as a military. So we're constantly making it better. We're being good stewards of the profession itself. And then you have your Esprit de Corps. And this is defined as our winning spirit. These are things that really focus on our traditions, our customs, the things that give that sense of belonging and that pride in our military and our Army in general. So let's dive just a little bit deeper into these. So honorable service. Now, yes, we've got the definition there on the bottom. It's our noble calling to service and sacrifice. But really that entails the noble calling to serve our nation, and it entails our devotion to duty in defense of that nation. So remember, you've got duty there. That's one of your 7 Army values. We stay consistent with the Army ethic, which is actually inclusive of all 7 Army values. And we believe in our selfless sacrifice, selfless service. Again, selfless service, another Army value. So all 4 of those things fall under your honorable service. So that's a little bit deeper dive into what that characteristic means. Now we also really focus on our military expertise. And what does this mean? It means that as a profession, we believe that education is important to your advancement. We believe in making sure our soldiers are qualified to perform expert work effectively and ethically. You're going to see that word ethic quite a bit, ethically. We also believe in the competence, character, and commitment of all of our individuals. You're going to see that pop up again a little bit later in this lesson. And we also believe that the requirements and conditions must continue to be maintained at all times. So we keep our standards high, we keep the condition of our soldiers, the condition of our equipment and our training at a high level, and it has to continue to be maintained. We can't let that drop off. Now, with the Army military expertise, we have 4 separate expert knowledge fields that we want our soldiers to understand. So one of those is the military technical field. This includes understanding the Army force design, our force generation, the effective and ethical use of our land power, integrating our technology, and conducting our military operations. So that all falls under the military technical field. But we also want our soldiers to have expert knowledge in the moral ethical field. And this is understanding how the Army applies its land power, which is often lethal, according to the American people's ethical expectations and values. So we do our work, we conduct ourselves in a way that aligns with the American expectations and values. This also includes the legal and moral content of the Army ethic and the cultural norms, and it includes shared and commonly agreed upon standards, beliefs, rules, and expectations that guide our behavior, and they're passed from generation to generation through the Army. These expectations as a whole, which is why it's the biggest piece, mold the development and actions of each Army professional and their whole unit in both peace and war. Now, moving on from that, we also have this political and cultural knowledge field. And that includes just understanding how Army professionals and units interact with unified action partners and civilian populations in all of our civil and military relations. That means that when we go out and we're doing things, we're working with other militaries, we're working with civilians in the area. We want to make sure that we're constantly working to increase and really foster those civil and military relationships. And then lastly, we also have the leader in human development expert knowledge field. Now, this informs how the profession actually inspires American citizens to that calling of service, that develops their professional identity, their talents, and certifies them in those competence, character, and commitment values that, again, we'll talk about a little bit later in the lesson. It's very important in this field that we understand how leader development works, and that's where that focus lies. So with all four of those, we really do create an area, and we create our training and our education to make sure that every single soldier, from your privates all the way up to our generals, that they understand all four of these fields and they become experts in those fields. Now, trust. We call this the bedrock of our profession, right? We want to ensure that we're constantly focusing on maintaining trust among our leaders, our peers, and our subordinates. We also want to maintain trust between our soldiers and our Army civilians. We also want to make sure that there's trust in the Army by both our professionals and their families. It's incredibly important that our families trust our leaders to develop us, to take care of us, and that we're also taking care of our families when the soldiers are away. And then we believe in instilling trust between the Army and the American people. It's very difficult to be in a situation where the American people don't trust the Army as a whole. So it's going to be important that you are conducting yourself in a way that shows that the American people can trust you to do the right thing. Now we have stewardship of the profession. So this is our long-term responsibility, right? So we want to make sure that we're always ensuring present and future development of our leaders. So mentorship, development, sending people to schools, making our leaders better. And with this, I've always said, when I was in company command, my goal was to make sure that my platoon leaders were going to be better company commanders than I could ever be. Anytime you're in a position of leadership, your goal should be to mentor and coach and develop the subordinates to be even better than you ever were. Make them the best leaders they can possibly be. Ensure that you are allowing them to develop themselves, that you're sending them to schools and other additional training to become better. Constantly focus on that future development. We also use this as we say we maintain the effectiveness of our training and equipment. So we're focusing our training to make sense. We're taking care of our equipment. We also want to exude confidence and quality character as a professional. So that's just being a good person. When you're out there, when you're in uniform, you are showing that you are confident and that you have quality character. And even when you're behind closed doors, you also want to make sure that you're maintaining that idea of having that quality character. And then we're continuously just striving to better the organization. That's really what all this comes down to, is that when you hang that uniform up and you're gone, did you leave that organization, that unit, that brigade, the Army itself in a better place than when you joined? So any decisions that you're making, any way that you're conducting yourself, think about that last bullet there, that are you continuously striving to better the organization as a whole? And last, we have our Esprit de Corps. So this idea is set in here to preserve our cherished legacy as an Army. So we want to promote our Esprit de Corps through our customs, our traditions, our different ceremonies that might seem old school. Some of them have been around for hundreds of years, right? So we want to preserve that unit history. We want to display our insignias. We use crests, we use patches, we have mottos, platoon mottos, company mottos, battalion mottos. All of that is just this idea, just as if you were on a football team, right? You have your team name, you have your numbers, you have maybe you're part of a school that had stickers on the helmet. Different ways that you're showing that history, showing the pride within that organization. And we do all of this to help all of our soldiers, our new generations, to understand and remember that the Army has a rich and noble history of this service to the nation, right? We're a very old organization. We don't want to forget all the great things that were done in the past, so we preserve those things. And it keeps us going forward. So like we talked about, there's a lot of that idea of this Army ethic, right? We've heard that word quite a bit. We consider this to be the heart of the Army. It's what keeps us going. It's what we focus everything around. And you'll notice that those 7 little things on the bottom hanging, do you see something about those? Do you recognize those? Those are your Army values. So loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage, all of those enveloped become the Army ethic. So that, when we're talking about ethical, it's, doing the right thing. That's a big part of integrity. And that's the heart of the Army. That's what we are based on. That's what we're founded on. All right, so now we have some attributes specific to the profession of arms. You'll see I kind of color-coded some of these words so you could see where they mesh in with those characteristics. So to be in the profession of arms and to consider it a profession, that means it requires expert knowledge. And that comes as unique skills in all people's individual and their Army units. We also exist through that relationship of trust that we talk about with its own members and the American people. So we're constantly building trust among members, American people, our allies, civilians in the areas that we're working with, our subordinates, our Army families, is always working on that relationship of trust. Now, to be considered the profession of arms, that means that we're constantly working on our development. So we're continuously developing, and that comes in, the leadership, but it's also focused on professionals at all ranks. So we are talking about developing our leaders all the way through your career, very bottom all the way up to the very top, constantly developing ourselves and the people that listen to us or follow us. It also requires that unwavering, deeply held set of values that when we adapt them and internalize them, they come forward in the character of our individual professionals. And then, of course, it requires that vital service to the American society, and that manifests itself in the duty of the individual professional. So those, if you can see there, they're kind of all tied to those key characteristics, those 5 characteristics. And then we're going to take those forward one more of how they become characteristics of our U.S. Army professionals. So when it comes to that military expertise, we advance expert knowledge, skills, abilities in both unified land operations, and we develop and certify every Army professional in that competence, character, and commitment. Keep remembering those 3 C's. We believe in preserving trust and confidence of the American people and our fellow Army professionals by sustaining those essential characteristics. We create and sustain professional organizational climates. We increase our cohesion, and we foster pride in the profession with our Esprit de Corps. And then through stewardship, we ensure, like I said, that present and future development and effectiveness of the Army profession's people and our resources. And then lastly, we're constantly strengthening that honorable service. And it's demonstrated with our strength of character by upholding the Army values and the Army ethic, the heart of the Army. And so let's think about it. How important is trust within the profession of arms? Well, without it, the Army couldn't even have the freedom of autonomy during our missions. Internal to the Army, our individual trustworthiness actually creates our bonds, creates them even stronger among our professionals, which serves as a vital organizing principle that's necessary for the Army to function as an effective and ethical profession. This is basically saying, without it, we can't exist. Without it, we can't do our job. Trust is the bedrock of our profession for a reason. It's incredibly important that we be trustworthy and that we work to be able to trust those around us. And so how are all those characteristics of Army professionals related to the actual Army profession essential characteristics? Well, you saw that. Character, competence, and commitment, those 3 C's, all have different portions. They all fall under different portions of our characteristics. So with the character, that plays into honorable service and stewardship. Our competence is really built within that military expertise. And then our commitment is shown through Esprit de Corps and stewardship. All of them, though, are related to this idea of trust. So now let's talk the 3 roles of Army professionals. Now that you understand those 5 key characteristics and how they all play into being the profession and the professional, we believe in these 3 roles. So as an Army professional, you need to be a professional of character. You need to be an honorable servant of the nation. Now this means that you serve honorably, according to that Army ethic, under the civilian authority, while obeying the laws of the nation and all legal orders. We reject and report all illegal, unethical, or immoral orders or actions. So that's how you play into your own character. We also want you to be competent professionals or Army experts. You should be able to perform your duty, lead and follow with discipline, strive for excellence, put the needs of others above your own, and accomplish that mission as a full team. And then lastly, we want you to be committed professionals, stewards of that Army profession. So we want you to embrace and uphold those Army values and standards of the profession, and are always accountable to each other and to the American people for your decisions and your actions. So those 3 C's, character, competence, and commitment, those 3 are the 3 roles that we really drive towards being. That is what's going to truly make you an Army professional. All right, so now let's move into a practical exercise. Okay, and we're going to talk about trust with this one. So I want you to pause this video because I truly want you to take this and do this exercise because it's going to open up your mind to thinking about trust in a different way. So what I want you to do is you're going to take the next 5 minutes or so, and I want you to create a list, right? Either on a piece of paper or on a Word doc, and you're going to separate it into 3 separate columns. And we're going to talk about making a list of actions that you could perform as an Army officer that might actually tarnish the trust relationship. And in your 3 columns, we're going to talk about subordinates, leaders, and Americans. So how could you, if you were an Army officer or think of another Army officer, what things could you do that would actually hurt the trust relationship with your subordinates? And then what could you do that could hurt the relationship with your own leaders? And then how could you potentially lose trust with Americans and the American people? So for example, you can see on this one, I've given a couple just startup and ways to start thinking. So with our subordinates, maybe we have dishonesty in our communication, and that could lose the trust of our subordinates. Maybe we show favoritism to specific soldiers, and then our other subordinates start to lose trust in us. And then for our leaders, maybe we withhold some critical information that our leadership needs to know, and then they lose trust in us. Or we fail to take responsibility for a mistake or a task that we didn't accomplish. And they again start losing trust with us. And then we think about the American people. What if we did something like misuse government resources? So we're not using them correctly. Well, then the American people could lose trust in us. Or if we even disregard those ethical standards that we talk about, we break a rule of engagement, and the American people lose trust. So you can see the real focus of this is talking about trust, but not so much what we can do to gain trust, but what decisions could you make that could actually lose that trust. So again, pause right here, start to fill out a list, see what you come up with, and then we'll move on to the next part. All right, so hopefully you were able to create a decent list that really got your mind going on things not to do, right? That's really what it comes down to. And then we're going to do this in a different way here with the second part of the practical exercise. And we're going to talk about jobs versus professions. And you heard early in the lesson, I gave you some examples of different jobs and how they're different from professions. But we really want to drive in this idea of why this is a profession, why the profession of arms is so important, and how we can think about it differently than a job. So this time we're going to create another T-chart, but just with 2 columns. And take some minutes to just make a list of jobs and then another list of what you think are professions. And keep in mind the things that we remember about additional education and careers and how we develop our leaders and how that plays into professions versus just a job. So you see the examples that I gave there, very brief, basic. Jobs could be something like a cashier at a store, a waitress at a restaurant, maybe just a shelf stalker at your local supermarket. Then you've got your professions. So that's something like a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. So again, pause the video right here, take some time and really think through the difference between jobs and professions. And if you can't quite decide if it's a job or a profession, think about what those characteristics and elements are that make something a true profession. All right, so I hope you did take the time to actually work through those practical exercises, or at least get your mind thinking about what was required of those. And then by the end of this, we were hoping that you could define the Army profession. So we defined that, and then we defined what an Army professional is, right? We talked about those 5 essential characteristics of the Army profession. And that includes that trust being the bedrock, right? We've got our stewardship of the profession itself. We've got our Esprit de Corps. We've got our military expertise, and of course, our honorable service. And then those 3 C's that play into those roles of Army professionals of character, competence, and commitment. So I really hope you gained a lot out of this. I hope you took those notes. If you have any questions on anything that was part of this lesson, I really encourage you, reach out to your primary instructor or advisor, maybe find an MS3 or an MS4 that could work through some of this with you. Talk to some of your classmates, get their input and their insight on the Army profession itself. And depending on when you're watching this, you might be able to reach out to me, shoot something in the comments. My email is silver.beatty, B-E-A-T-Y, at mso.umt.edu. I'm happy to help out, get you connected to the right people. But as always, thank you for watching. I hope you're able to make it through this pretty tough lecture to listen to, but I do hope that you gained something out of it. So I'll see you on the next one.